Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. My name is EVELYN MARLOWE. I'm 39 years old, and I walked into a room where I wasn't supposed to be. The grand ballroom glittered under a cascade of chandeliers, the air thick with the hum of champagne toasts and congratulatory murmurs. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't invited, but I didn't care. After all, when you've spent your whole life watching from the outside, you get used to the feeling. As I stood at the door, the receptionist flicked her eyes down at the list in front of her and dismissed me with a quick, polite smile. "Sorry, your name's not on the guest list." I nodded, the polite mask already in place. I wasn't about to argue. I wasn't supposed to be here. So why was I standing here, staring through the glass doors at the people who didn't even know I existed? My father, Richard Marlowe, stood at the heart of the crowd, his booming laughter echoing across the room as he chatted with Adrian, my older brother. Adrian, the one they all noticed, the golden child, the one who was always the future, the one who could do no wrong. I tried to keep my breathing steady as I caught a glimpse of my mother, Marion, fussing over Adrian's tie with the delicate touch only she had. It was like a scene from a picture I didn't belong in. I should leave. I turned toward the exit, my hand hovering over the door handle, the weight of my years of silent erasure pressing down on me. Then I heard it. Adrian's voice rose, cutting through the chatter with a sharp edge of disbelief. "Who let her in?" His words, too loud, too harsh, bounced off the marble walls. I froze. And then, before I could even process what was happening, Lionel Graff, a retired tech visionary I'd worked with years ago, stepped into view. He wasn't just any figure. He was the kind of man whose presence shifted the atmosphere in a room. His reputation preceded him like a halo. "That's her," he said, his voice booming, a strange reverence underscoring every word. "That's EVELYN MARLOWE. She's the one who saved us all." The room fell silent. A hushed murmur swept through the crowd, like the ripples after a stone hits water. I stood there, unsure whether to laugh or choke on the weight of it all. For years, my achievements had been invisible, but now, here it was, the recognition I'd been denied for so long, coming from the lips of a man who had never once forgotten what I'd done. Adrian's face tightened, his expression morphing from surprise to something darker. His eyes flicked over to me, but his gaze quickly moved away, as if he could erase the acknowledgement with a single glance. I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to see me, if I wanted anyone here to see me, really. So I stood there for a moment, letting the moment play out. The people in the room, the ones who had never bothered to know who I was, now had to reckon with the truth that had been buried beneath layers of family pride and silent omissions. Lionel Graff turned toward me, his expression full of warmth. "The Marlowes owe more to you than they'll ever admit," he said, his voice low but clear, reaching the ears of everyone who stood nearby. For a brief, surreal moment, the world felt as though it had shifted under me. It wasn't victory, but something else, something I hadn't realized I needed until it was in front of me. They all knew. They couldn't pretend anymore. But still, there was Adrian, standing next to our father, the people who had always been the center of my world. And I was nothing more than a shadow on the fringes. No amount of words from Lionel could change that. I turned to leave, my footsteps light, like I was walking through someone else's dream. But as I stepped toward the door, I heard it again. Adrian's voice, quieter now, but sharper than before. "I should have known." And as I walked out, leaving them all behind, I realized it wasn't just about being seen, it was about what came next. What happens when everything you've worked for, everything you've sacrificed, finally surfaces, only to be ignored again. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible anymore, but I wasn't sure it made a difference. Growing up in the Marlowe household was like being a cog in a machine that was always in motion, always striving for perfection. There was a rhythm to our lives, a predictable beat that we all had to follow. It wasn't about love or affection, it was about legacy, achievement, and being seen. The Marlowes didn't do weakness. I remember my father, Richard Marlowe, like a towering presence in our home. He was a man of structure and authority, a former Air Force officer who'd built his aerospace empire from the ground up. His eyes were always scanning the horizon, searching for the next challenge, the next triumph, and he expected nothing less than the best from his family. It wasn't about who you were, it was about what you could achieve. From an early age, Adrian had been the one who made it easy. He was everything our father wanted. The firstborn, the star athlete, the golden child who excelled at everything: sports, academics. leadership. He was the perfect heir to the Marlowe name, the one who carried the weight of our family's expectations without breaking a sweat. And then there was me. I wasn't a disappointment, but I wasn't the shining example either. I was different, quiet, calculating, obsessed with puzzles, strategy, and numbers. I spent my days buried in books, in code, in figuring things out that no one else cared about. I didn't need the accolades, I just wanted the answers. But in the Marlowe household, answers were never enough. Results were what mattered. Results and the way you carried them. I was good. No, I was great at what I did. But no one saw it. Not when Adrian was around. He was the one who got the praise, who received the nods of approval at family dinners. I was just the other child, the one who never quite fit into the mold. I can still hear my mother's voice in the back of my mind, soft and kind, always trying to keep the peace. Marion Marlowe. Quiet, always efficient, never raising her voice. She had a way of making the chaos of our household seem like it was nothing at all. But behind her placid exterior, I knew she felt it too. She never had a voice at the table, not like Dad, not like Adrian, but she had a quiet strength. It was just that no one ever acknowledged it. And me? I learned early on that my voice, my accomplishments, wouldn't be noticed unless I screamed for them. So I kept quiet. I remember one evening, sitting at the dinner table, Adrian proudly recounting how he'd made captain of the soccer team, how he'd aced another test, how he was already being courted by Ivy League schools. Dad sat there, beaming with pride, his eyes practically sparkling. And there I was, sitting across from them, trying to swallow my resentment with every bite of food. "You're lucky, Evelyn," my mother would often say, her voice a little too light, a little too quick. "You don't have the pressures Adrian faces. You can take things at your own pace." At my own pace, I was slow. I didn't want the pressures, but I sure as hell didn't want to be invisible either. And in those moments, as Adrian got every single scrap of attention, I realized something. No matter how much I achieved, no matter how many puzzles I solved, I would always be the second choice, the backup. It was Adrian's world, and I was just living in it. But that didn't stop me. I kept my head down, buried myself in my work, and did what I could. I built my career in intelligence, worked in the shadows, and saw things that no one else did. I had a role to play in the bigger game, but no one had to know about it. I wasn't looking for recognition. Then came the moment that would change everything. The day I saw the cracks in the carefully constructed Marlowe empire. The day Adrian's arrogance would finally break something that couldn't be fixed. We were all sitting around the table when Dad told us about the major security operation that was coming up, one that would involve cutting-edge technology. His company was at the center of it, and they were all counting on it to be a success. Everyone in the room expected Adrian to take the lead, and he did. But I saw something Adrian didn't, something that no one else noticed, not even Dad. The data was off. It was subtle, but I was trained to see these things. The numbers didn't line up. It was too clean, too perfect. Something didn't add up, and I knew it was a trap. I tried to warn them, tried to get Adrian to see it, but he didn't listen. Not to me, not ever. "You're overthinking this, Evelyn," Adrian had said, brushing me off as he adjusted his tie. "It's a calculated risk. We need to move fast, not second-guess ourselves." "You don't understand," I said, frustration rising in my chest. "This isn't just a risk, it's a trap." But he didn't hear me. He never did. The operation went ahead, and the fallout was immediate. Sensitive prototypes were stolen, the company's reputation was shredded, and 3 employees were injured. I watched as Adrian spun the narrative to fit his version of events, calling it a calculated risk and a successful gamble. Everyone bought it, everyone except me. And there I was again, watching from the sidelines as the Marlowe family protected its golden boy, covering up the mistakes while I was shoved into the background. The truth was buried, and once again, I was invisible. No one cared about what I had seen, what I had warned them about. They just wanted to protect Adrian's image. Image, my expertise, meant nothing. That was the moment I knew something had to change. I wasn't going to be silent anymore, but in a family like mine, silence is the loudest thing of all. It started like any other day at Marlowe Technologies, my father's company, a sleek, high-tech aerospace firm that prided itself on innovation and cutting-edge technology. The morning buzzed with energy, the usual chatter of engineers and execs. But this time, the air was thick with anticipation. We were about to roll out the most ambitious cyber operation the company had ever attempted. Adrian was at the helm, as usual, his charisma filling the room, his words smooth and confident. My father was there too, his eyes gleaming with pride. Everyone was looking at Adrian, waiting for him to lead the way. He was the future, after all. Ate, on the other hand, was at my desk, buried in the reports that no one bothered to read. As the head of security and operations, it was my job to ensure the integrity of our systems and data. I was good at it, better than most. But no one ever cared about the behind-the-scenes work, the quiet things that kept the machine running. This time, I wasn't going to let it slide. The moment I glanced over the incoming data, I knew something was wrong. There was a subtle anomaly in the patterns, a little red flag that shouldn't have been there. It was hidden in the flow of the network traffic, buried beneath layers of encryption, but I could see it. I knew it. This was a trap. I immediately went to Adrian's office, my pulse quickening as I gathered my thoughts. "Adrian," I said, standing in his doorway, "there's something you need to see. The data from the operation, it's off. We're walking straight into a trap." He looked up from his laptop, his brows furrowing as he clicked through a few screens. "It's fine, Evelyn. We've got it covered. We've run simulations. Everything checks out." I shook my head, stepping forward. "No, Adrian, I've double-checked. This isn't just a bug. This is someone trying to get to us. It's too clean, too perfect. Someone's already in the system." He didn't even pause. "You're overthinking this. It's just a hiccup. I'm going forward with it." I felt the familiar knot in my stomach, the sensation of being brushed aside once again. He wasn't even listening. My warnings had become background noise, just like everything else I'd said in the last 10 years. It didn't matter how many times I proved I was right. He was Adrian, and that was all that mattered. "Adrian, please." I tried again, my voice tightening with frustration. "Evelyn, I've got this. Let me handle it," he snapped, the edge in his tone sharp enough to silence me. I stared at him for a moment, the weight of years of being overlooked pressing down on me. Then, I turned on my heel and left his office, a simmering anger bubbling beneath my skin. I had done everything I could. It was no longer my problem. The operation kicked off an hour later. Adrian pushed forward, leading with the kind of confidence that had always been his armor. It didn't matter that I was the one who'd uncovered the anomaly, the one who knew exactly what we were up against. It didn't matter that I'd been right. Again, within hours, everything started to unravel. The prototype we'd been working on was compromised. Data began leaking, slipping through the cracks of our supposedly secure system. The breach spread like wildfire, and within minutes, our entire security protocol was shattered. I could hear the panic from the other side of the building as the engineers scrambled to contain the damage. I rushed back to my station, hands flying across the keyboard, trying to patch things up. But it was too late. The damage was done. The company's reputation was on the line. People were going to get hurt. By the time I was able to report the breach to Adrian, he was already in damage control mode. I could see the flicker of anxiety in his eyes, hidden beneath the calm facade he was so good at putting on. But it was too late for that. Too late for spin. He stood in front of the conference table, his voice booming as he spun the narrative. "This was a calculated risk," he said confidently. "We were always prepared for something like this. It's just part of the business, a setback, but we will recover." My stomach churned as I sat in the back of the room. Listening to him, the words sounded rehearsed, safe, but they didn't match the panic I'd seen in the faces of the employees in the hallways. They didn't match the weight of the failure hanging over us. I wanted to stand up, to scream that it wasn't just a setback, that it was his arrogance, his refusal to listen, that had led to this disaster. But I stayed silent. I always stayed silent. The truth had no place in a room like this, not when Adrian was at the center of it all. And so, as Adrian continued to spin his version of events, the company rallied behind him. The investors were reassured. The media was given the carefully crafted narrative of a calculated risk. But we both knew the truth. The prototypes were stolen. The data was compromised. The team was shaken. And as I sat there, in the background once again, I realized the bitter truth. Adrian wasn't just ruining the company. He was ruining everything we had built. But no one was going to see it. I wasn't going to be the one to stop him. Not this time. The operation was a disaster, and no one was going to own up to it. Not Adrian, not my father, not anyone who mattered. It was all swept under the rug. And once again, I was invisible. Just another cog in the machine. And when it was over, all I was left with was the crushing realization that no one would ever see me. Not for who I was, not for what I had done. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a villain. I was just Evelyn, the woman who warned them, but no one ever listened. And as the fallout continued to spread, I knew something had changed. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of a decision I couldn't take back. It was time to step away. Time to stop being the invisible one. Time to make them see me. After the operation went south, the Marlowe family carried on like nothing had happened. Or rather, they acted like nothing had gone too wrong. Adrian continued to spin the narrative, presenting the cyber attack as nothing more than a calculated risk, a bump in the road that, with time, could be smoothed over. No one dared to challenge him, especially not in the boardroom. But I knew better. I could see the cracks in the facade, the stolen prototypes, the data leaks. It was all there, buried in the systems like a ticking time bomb, waiting to be uncovered. Adrian might have buried the truth beneath layers of his charm and his unshakable confidence, but I wasn't willing to let it stay buried. I couldn't. It had started as a simple check, a quick look at the company logs just to make sure nothing else was compromised. It was routine. I wasn't expecting much, but the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a minor hiccup. This wasn't just a risk gone wrong. This was a cover-up. I pulled up the logs, scanning through the system's access records. But then I saw it, an anomaly that stopped my breath in its tracks. There were time-stamped discrepancies, manipulated data logs, and altered timelines. The system had been tampered with, carefully by someone within the company. The fingerprints on these alterations led straight to Adrian's team, and from there, straight to Adrian himself. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before the rage could rise to the surface. The betrayal felt suffocating, the realization heavy in my chest. But it wasn't just about Adrian. It was about them. My father, the man who had built this empire on the backs of his family, never bothering to ask who had been left behind in the process. I opened the report, my eyes scanned over the evidence, everything falling into place. Adrian had known the risks. He had pushed ahead with a public victory in mind, ignoring the signs I had pointed out, and when the operation failed, he had buried the truth, shifted the blame, while hiding behind his polished narrative of risk-taking. But no more. The betrayal burned in my veins, and I could feel the weight of years spent in the shadows, watching while my brother, my own flesh and blood, played the hero in front of everyone who mattered. It was time to let the truth speak for itself. I compiled the evidence into a report, each piece more damning than the last. Screenshots, system logs, and timelines. Everything. It was airtight. There would be no denying it. If I could just get it into the right hands, the corporate ethics board would have no choice but to investigate. But that wasn't enough. The Marlowes didn't deal with things like this in public. They buried it, swept it under the rug, protected the brand at all costs. And I knew deep down that even if the board acknowledged it, the Marlowes would find a way to cover it up. That's when I decided to go beyond the board. I compiled the report into an encrypted file, ensuring it couldn't be traced back to me. Then, under a false identity, I submitted the report to the board anonymously. There was nothing I could do from the inside, but I had learned enough about corporate bureaucracy to know that once the board got involved, it would have to go public, at least eventually. But that wasn't the end of it. I knew what would happen next. They wouldn't want to lose face. They wouldn't want anyone to know that Adrian, the golden boy, was the reason this whole thing had collapsed. No, they'd bury it. They'd dismiss it as a small internal issue, and I would be silenced, pushed aside, again. But this time, I wouldn't let them. My phone buzzed, breaking my focus. It was my father. "Meet me in my office. Now." The words were clipped, cold. His tone, always so commanding, left no room for discussion. I stood up from my desk, a feeling of dread washing over me. As I walked to his office, I couldn't help but wonder, how much of this did he know? How much of the failure had he willingly ignored? I knocked twice and entered without waiting for a response. My father sat behind his massive desk, his hands folded in front of him, his face unreadable. "Evelyn," he started, his voice low and sharp. "I just got off the phone with the corporate ethics board. They've received an anonymous report. They're launching an investigation into the data breach." I swallowed, my throat dry, my hands cold against my sides. And it mentions you," he said, his gaze never wavering. "It claims you were the one who flagged the data discrepancies. It paints you as the whistleblower." I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. "What are you going to do about it?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing the cost of his next words. "We're going to bury it," he said finally. We'll handle it internally. You'll be reassigned. Out of the public eye. No one will know it was you. Just like last time, I muttered, the words slipping from my lips before I could stop them. My father's eyes flashed with something like anger, but he didn't speak. I took a slow breath, my hands trembling. What happens when this gets out? What happens when the truth comes out and people know what really happened? You're not listening, my father said, his voice rising. This is about protecting the family name. This is about protecting our legacy. We cannot afford to let this get out of hand. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of everything I had sacrificed for this family, everything I had done, crushing me. So this is how it works then? I do the work, I save the company, and you protect Adrian's image? Is that what you're telling me? Evelyn, he began, his voice softening, but I could already hear the dismissal in it, the same one I'd heard my entire life. You know how this works? You've always known. I took one last look at him, my father, the man who'd never seen me for who I truly was, and turned on my heel. I'm done, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm done pretending. You want to protect the legacy? Fine, but you'll do it without me. I walked out of the office, leaving behind the weight of a lifetime of expectations. The truth was buried, yes, but not by me, not anymore. I didn't look back. The first few days after I left Marlowe Technologies were strange, almost disorienting. It wasn't the freedom I expected, it was emptiness. I moved into a small coastal town, one of those places where everyone knows everyone but they leave you alone if you mind your own business. It was a place where I could disappear, not from the world, but from the story I had been a part of for so long. I needed a new start. I needed space from the ghosts of my past, the family, the company, the silent rage I'd carried for years. My new home was nothing special, a modest house a block from the beach. The scent of salt water and pine trees hung in the air, a welcome change from the sterile, metallic smell of the corporate offices I had spent most of my life in. It felt calm. I spent my days working on cybersecurity contracts, ones that paid well enough but kept me hidden in the shadows, just the way I liked it. No clients knew my name, no one needed to. I found solace in the quiet. No more family dinners where I was an afterthought. No more pretending I mattered. The weight of being ignored, of being invisible, slowly began to lift. But it wasn't enough. I thought it would be. I told myself that I would find peace in the solitude. But every time I sat down at my desk or walked through the empty house, a nagging feeling began to creep in. It wasn't just about leaving the Marlowes or Marlowe Technologies. It was about losing myself in the process. The work I did was groundbreaking. Predictive cybersecurity models, algorithms that could spot threats before they even materialized. But I never published my findings. I never sought recognition. What was the point? The only person I needed to impress was myself. Then, one day, as I was deep into a research project, the past caught up with me. It came in the form of a name I hadn't expected to hear again. Nathan Cole. Nathan was one of the employees injured in the failed operation at Marlowe Technologies. I had tried to forget about that day, the way it had played out, the chaos, the hurt, the realization that no one cared about the fallout except for Adrian's reputation. But Nathan's name had lingered in my mind, especially after I had seen him in the hospital, bandaged and bruised, a victim of a disaster no one had wanted to prevent. I hadn't seen Nathan since that day, but I knew he had left the company. I'd heard he had moved out of town, trying to rebuild his life, trying to put the whole thing behind him. And I understood that. I had tried to do the same. But now, out of nowhere, I saw his name in my inbox. One of those cold, impersonal emails that felt like it had been sent to dozens of people. A newsletter of sorts. "Hi, Evelyn," it began. "It's been a while. I hope you're doing well. I was thinking about our old colleagues in the company. Some things never change, huh? Would love to catch up if you're interested." I stared at the screen, frozen. Nathan Cole wanted to talk. Why now? Was he reaching out because he wanted answers, or was he just trying to find some form of closure? I didn't know, but I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. But something in me, some dormant part of myself, wanted to hear his voice. I hadn't spoken to anyone who truly knew what had happened in years. I hadn't let anyone in, and part of me felt like I needed to. I typed a quick response, my fingers moving with practiced ease. "Hi, Nathan. It's good to hear from you. I'm glad to see you're doing okay. I'd be open to catching up. Maybe we could meet for coffee sometime." I hit send before I could second guess myself. The response came almost immediately. Coffee sounds good. How about tomorrow? There's a place down by the pier. Let me know if you're free. And just like that, I agreed. The next day, I met Nathan at a small cafe overlooking the water. It wasn't fancy, just a local spot with mismatched chairs and an old jukebox playing in the corner. The place felt comfortable, a little worn, but real, just like the life I was trying to build here. Nathan was sitting at a table by the window when I walked in. His hair was a little longer than I remembered, and his face had a few more lines, but his eyes still had the same warmth. He stood when he saw me, his expression a mix of surprise and something else. Relief, maybe. He seemed genuinely happy to see me. Hey, he said, his voice low and warm. It's good to see you. Yeah, you too, I replied, sitting down. There was an awkward pause before either of us spoke again. So, Nathan said after a moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. I've been thinking a lot about that day, about the operation, the aftermath. You were right, Evelyn, about the trap. You saw it before anyone else did. I felt a knot in my stomach. You don't need to thank me, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I couldn't stop it. None of us could. I know, he said, looking at me with an intensity I hadn't expected. But you were the only one who tried, and that meant something, even if no one ever recognized it. I swallowed, unsure of what to say. It didn't matter in the end, I muttered, the bitterness slipping out before I could stop it. It was always going to be Adrian's show. Nothing I did was ever going to change that. Nathan leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Maybe not, he said softly, but you still tried. You were the one who saw the truth, Evelyn, and even if no one else saw it, I'm not going to forget that. For the first time in years, I felt something real, not relief, not triumph, but recognition, a small piece of the truth, laid bare between two people who understood it in ways no one else ever could. We spent the next few hours talking about the operation, about life after Marlowe Technologies, about where we had both ended up. The conversation was easy, natural, like we were picking up right where we had left off. But as I drove home that evening, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't the answers I had been searching for. It wasn't closure, but it was something more important. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, and it made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't done yet. I wasn't done with the truth, and I wasn't done with myself. The phone call came on a quiet Wednesday morning, and at first, I thought I misheard it. I had been sitting at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, when my phone rang. Evelyn, it's Adrian? The voice on the other end was crisp, too polished. I wanted to let you know that we're hosting the annual Marlowe Visionary Awards at the gala next month, and I'm being honored for my contributions to the company. It's going to be a big deal. I could hear the self-satisfaction in his voice, that slight undercurrent of smugness I'd grown so familiar with. He was used to being in the spotlight, of course, the Marlowe legacy and all its promises wrapped tightly around him. I hope you'll join us, he continued. It's a prestigious event, one for people who have helped the company succeed. I thought you'd want to be there. I sat frozen, my mind spinning in that half-second gap between disbelief and realization. He thought he was doing me a favor, extending some sort of olive branch, an invitation that would make it all better. He always did that. He always played the part of the benevolent hero, even when he was the one who made me disappear. Of course, I said, my voice tight. I'd love to be there. And that was it. The conversation ended without fanfare, the polite exchange of pleasantries as though nothing had ever happened between us. But inside, I was seething. I didn't have to be invited. I didn't need his approval, his acknowledgement, his fake generosity. It wasn't even the invitation itself that bothered me. It was everything it represented. A carefully curated narrative of success, a world where Adrian was the shining star, where he called the shots and got all the credit for things I'd quietly done behind the scenes. But something twisted inside me when I saw the details of the event, emailed to me the following day. It wasn't a formal invitation per se. It was more like an announcement with a vague reference to a list of attendees. And when I looked closely, I realized that my name wasn't on it. There it was, in black and white. Adrian's name, front and center, alongside the VIP guests, the high-ranking corporate executives, and a few of the company's elite investors. My name wasn't even listed as a +1. No mention of me whatsoever. I wasn't even a shadow in his carefully crafted success story. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He hadn't invited me because he wanted me there. He invited me because it was part of the narrative he needed to tell. A Marlowe Visionary Award Gala wouldn't be complete without the estranged, self-deprecating sister who worked behind the scenes, who sacrificed everything for the family business without ever being recognized. The thought churned my stomach. This was Adrian's grand performance, and I was nothing more than a prop, a silent witness to his manufactured success. I had to go. I didn't know why. Maybe it was because I was tired of being erased, of being overlooked and treated like the invisible child in a family that always catered to Adrian's needs. Maybe it was because I wanted to see the faces of the people who had ignored me for years. Or maybe it was because, despite everything, I needed to see it for myself. See him on his stage, basking in the applause, while the rest of us remained in the shadows. Either way, I couldn't let it go. The night of the gala arrived, and I stood in front of my full-length mirror, adjusting the black dress I had bought on a whim. It wasn't flashy, nothing too extravagant, but it was simple and elegant, exactly the way I wanted it. I didn't need to stand out, not like Adrian, not like the people who had built their lives around appearances. I drove to the venue, the grand hotel that served as the perfect backdrop for Adrian's performance. The long, sleek hallways gleamed with gold accents, polished floors reflecting the murmurs of guests in their expensive suits. It was a world I didn't belong to, a world I'd spent years serving without question. The moment I stepped through the door, I could feel it, the weight of eyes on me, the subtle shift in the atmosphere as people glanced over, confused at my presence. I wasn't supposed to be there. I walked to the registration desk, where the receptionist glanced down at her list with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Name?" she asked, her tone a little too formal, a little too cold. "Marlowe," I said, the word sounding heavier than it should have. The receptionist scanned the list, her eyes flicking between the paper and me, her smile faltering for just a moment before she quickly recovered. "I'm sorry, I don't see your name here," she said, the words like a slap. "I'll need to call someone to confirm." "Of course," I replied, my voice steady, though my insides were churning. I wanted to leave, to turn around and walk away from this place, from everything it represented. But I stayed. I had to stay. The receptionist called over a colleague, and they whispered in hushed tones, exchanging looks as they fumbled through the paperwork. The truth was clear. I wasn't meant to be there, and Adrian's grand gesture, his invitation to this prestigious gala, was nothing more than an attempt to control the narrative once again. The receptionist finally picked up the phone, dialing a number I couldn't hear. But then, just as I began to turn away, a voice interrupted from behind. "That's her. She's the one who saved us all." Lionel Graff, the retired tech visionary, who had been the only one to ever see me. The words caught everyone off guard. The murmurs faded as Lionel stepped forward, his presence commanding attention, as always. "She's the one who found the flaw in the system, the one who kept the company from falling apart," he continued, his voice carrying through the room like a wave crashing against the shore. The receptionist, caught in the sudden shift of attention, stammered, "Oh, of course. Sorry for the misunderstanding, Ms. Marlowe. Please, go right in." I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me as I stepped past the doors into the gala. I wasn't the invisible child anymore, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to be seen. Adrian stood at the front of the room, his posture perfect, his smile radiant as he accepted congratulations from everyone in his orbit. When his eyes found me across the room, his face shifted, just for a moment, from triumph to something colder, something darker. But then he quickly masked it, the perfect CEO once again. I walked past him, ignoring the tightness in my chest, the years of silence pressing against me. I wasn't here for him anymore. I wasn't here to be his backdrop. I wasn't here for the recognition. I was here for me. And as I stepped deeper into the crowd, I realized something for the first time. I didn't need them to see me, not the way they wanted to. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Tonight, I was finally standing in my own light, and this time, I wouldn't let it fade into the shadows. Adrian was still smiling when Lionel Graff's words cut through the air. The tension in the room shifted from polite curiosity to something far heavier, something more loaded. The murmurs of the guests rippled, like the surface of a calm pond suddenly disturbed by a stone. I stood still, the weight of the moment pressing against me. I could feel the eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. Lionel was still speaking, his voice calm, but filled with the kind of authority that demanded attention. EVELYN Marlowe was the one who found the anomaly, the one who flagged the security breach before it spiraled out of control. If it weren't for her, This company would have lost far more than prototypes. You all owe her. A few seconds of stunned silence followed. Then, slowly, the ripple of realization spread through the room. The guests, most of whom had never given me a second glance, now stood frozen, eyes wide, mouths open. No one knew what to do with this sudden revelation. Adrian's face, always so composed, faltered for just a moment. His smile, which had been so effortless before, tightened into something thinner, something far less genuine. His eyes scanned the room, seeking a way to regain control of the narrative, but the moment had already slipped from his hands. He cleared his throat, stepping forward with a practiced smile. "Yes, well," he began, his voice steady, but lacking the usual confidence. "Evelyn's work was certainly valuable, but let's not forget the collective effort of the team that made this operation a success. This is a moment for all of us." The crowd seemed to breathe collectively, their attention moving from me back to him, the story he was spinning regaining some momentum. The guests nodded, some applauding, others offering him congratulatory smiles. But it wasn't the same as before. Something had shifted. I stood there, anchored in place by the silence that followed Lionel's words. The truth was out in the open, but Adrian had managed to twist it. Again, my gaze met Lionel's, and for a brief moment, I saw it. The recognition in his eyes. He didn't need to say another word. He knew I had done what I had to, that I had forced the truth into the open. But the truth didn't matter here, not in the world they had built, not in the game they were all playing. Behind me, the screens on the wall flickered to life, displaying the company's logo, a sleek representation of Marlowe Technologies' success. The lights dimmed slightly, and a presentation began. On the screen, detailed charts and graphs flashed, showcasing Adrian's achievements, his visionary leadership, and the so-called triumph of the company under his guidance. But then, just as the applause started to pick up again, something changed. A new screen flickered to life behind Adrian's back, unnoticed by most of the crowd, except for me. It was my work. Decrypted data scrolled across the screen, a sequence of code that had been part of the operation I had flagged. My name appeared, half redacted but enough to see the signature of my work. It was unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't have to look to know what was happening. Someone, likely Lionel, who had always known the power of transparency, had arranged this. The truth was spilling out, pixel by pixel, and Adrian's carefully constructed image was beginning to unravel. The applause faltered. Conversations died out. The murmurs that followed were louder than they should have been, whispers traveling through the crowd like wildfire. I didn't turn to look at Adrian. I didn't need to. I had seen that look before. The panic, the way he tried to smooth over everything with his charm. But it wasn't working. Not this time. And then, as if everything had been orchestrated perfectly, the screens showed a snapshot of the data, the anomaly I had caught before it could destroy the company. Right beside it, the timestamp of the original data breach flashed in bold numbers. It was undeniable. I watched the room shift as people began to realize the truth, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place in front of their eyes. Adrian's face had gone pale, his perfect mask beginning to crack. It was only a matter of time before he would be forced to acknowledge what he had buried for so long. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing where I was supposed to be, right in the center of it all. The room fell silent. Adrian stepped back, his hands at his sides, the crowd watching him expectantly. No more words came, no more excuses, no more bravado. The truth was louder than his smile now. I stayed where I was, watching the unfolding drama, watching the empire my father had built shudder under the weight of its own lies. The applause came slowly at first, almost hesitant. Then it grew, louder, more certain. But it wasn't for Adrian. It wasn't for his visionary leadership. The recognition was for something else entirely. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. But not because of Adrian or the company. It was because of the truth I had fought for. The truth that could no longer be hidden. As the applause continued, I remained seated. The noise, the flashing lights, the fabricated success, none of it mattered anymore. Not when the truth was out, not when they couldn't ignore it. The silence in the room spoke louder than any applause ever could. Adrian stood frozen in place, the weight of the moment settling over him. For the first time, the hero's mask had slipped, and what was left in its place was a man forced to confront the cost of his arrogance. I stayed in my seat, watching as the Marlowe empire shifted under the pressure of its own lies. The applause faded, but the truth lingered, like a quiet victory I would carry with me from that night and beyond. I was done hiding, and this time, no one could erase me. The gala continued around me, the sounds of clinking glasses and polite conversations filling the air, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. My chest was tight with the strange mix of satisfaction and something far darker. I had done it. I had revealed the truth. But I wasn't sure if I felt any better. I stood up slowly, my legs almost stiff from the weight of what had just happened. The screens were now silent, the images of the data breach still burned into the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. I knew there would be fallout. I wasn't fool enough to think there wouldn't be. But I hadn't expected what happened next. As I made my way toward the exit, Adrian's voice sliced through the air, sharp and low but unmistakable. "Evelyn." I stopped, though every part of me wanted to keep walking, to leave the entire facade behind me. But I turned, facing him. Adrian stood a few paces behind me, his expression now fully stripped of its polished exterior. His usual mask of confidence had cracked, and what was left was anger, raw, unfiltered. "What the hell was that?" he hissed, stepping closer. His eyes were wild, the control he'd so carefully cultivated slipping away. "You think you're the only one who's ever sacrificed for this family? For this company?" I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off, his voice rising. "You think you can just waltz in here and expose everything? Like you're some kind of martyr? You're nothing but a traitor." The words stung, but I didn't let it show. I met his eyes, cold, unwavering. "I didn't expose anything that wasn't already there. You've been lying to everyone, to Dad, to the board, to yourself." Adrian's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He looked like he wanted to lash out, but the room was still buzzing with activity behind us, the noise muffling the raw intensity between us. "You always did this," he spat. "Always played the quiet one, the invisible one. You always thought you could do everything better than me, didn't you? Just because you worked in the shadows doesn't mean you deserve the recognition." I shook my head, disgust bubbling up. "I never asked for recognition. I asked for you to listen, for you to not drag us all down with your reckless ego." Adrian took a step forward, but I didn't flinch. "You think you're the only one who worked for this family? Who worked for our company?" He looked around as if searching for support, but no one came to his aid, not even our father. "No," I said, voice steady. "I know I'm not, but I'm the only one who called out your mistakes, and that is what makes the difference." The silence between us was heavy, a tension that felt like it could snap at any moment. Adrian's eyes flickered with something, resentment, regret, but most of all, fear. He was scared, scared of what I had exposed, scared of losing everything. "You've ruined everything," he said, his voice now almost a whisper, but sharp with venom. "You've destroyed the Marlowe name. You think you've done something noble? You've just thrown it all away for nothing." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "It's already gone, Adrian. You've been ruining it for years and you just didn't see it. The empire we built, the one Dad fought so hard to create, it's all based on lies. It's built on you lying to everyone, pretending like you know what's best when you don't even listen to the people who actually know what's going on." The words hit him harder than I expected. His face flushed, but he didn't speak. He just stared at me, his breathing uneven. The reality of what I'd exposed starting to sink in. I could see it in his eyes, how he was trying to calculate the next move, how his arrogance was fighting against the undeniable truth I had just dropped on him. But it didn't matter. I wasn't done yet. "I'm not the problem here, Adrian," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the tension. "You've been pretending to be the hero for so long that you've forgotten who the real people are, the ones who've always been there, working behind the scenes, the ones you've taken for granted, and I'm done being invisible for you." Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but the words died on his lips. From behind him, I saw Dad approach, slow, measured steps, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, just loud enough for Adrian and me to hear. "Enough." I turned to him, my chest tightening. I could feel the weight of years of disappointments, of unspoken truths in his words. He wasn't angry, not at Adrian, not at me, but resigned. The kind of resignation that comes when you know you've lost control. "You've made your point, Evelyn," he said, his eyes flickering between Adrian and me. "Now let's not make this worse." Adrian's expression shifted again, frustration flashing in his eyes. But before he could speak, my father raised his hand, cutting him off. "Adrian, it's over. Let it go." The words felt like a weight, like the final nail in the coffin of whatever illusion we had been living under. Adrian stood there, stunned, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and something else, something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned, heading toward the exit without a second glance. I had done it. I had finally taken the step that would make them all see. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their acknowledgement. I had freed myself from the cage they had built around me. The hallway was quiet as I walked down it, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls, the weight of the confrontation lingering behind me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I was finally free, and nothing would ever make me invisible again. I stepped into the cool night air, the weight of the gala, of the confrontation with Adrian and the silent acknowledgement from my father, still hanging on me. The crowd, the voices, the endless chatter, all of it felt so far away now. It was over. The game had shifted. The truth had been spoken. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. As I walked toward the parking lot, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing the stream of messages I had ignored earlier, all from my mother and Adrian. They were frantic, desperate, full of the same guilt-tripping words they always used. But the most recent message was different. It was from Nathan Cole, the former employee who had reached out to me earlier. His words were simple, but they carried more weight than any text I'd received that night. "You were right. You're finally being seen, Evelyn. Keep pushing." I smiled bitterly, feeling a strange sense of solidarity. Nathan, someone who had been collateral damage in Adrian's reckless game, understood, and for the first time, I didn't feel so alone. As I reached my car, I noticed something odd. A group of people, standing a little farther down the lot, blocking my way. It wasn't the usual late-night crowd waiting to leave, or stragglers from the event. This was different. They were waiting. For me. I stopped in my tracks, confused, until I recognized one of the faces. It was Lionel Graff. Behind him stood a handful of former employees, all wearing expressions of quiet respect, their faces somber but full of understanding. A couple of them I had worked with years ago, others I had only heard about in passing, but all of them shared one thing. They had witnessed the mess that had unfolded at Marlowe Technologies, and now they were standing there, waiting for me. I took a slow breath, unsure of what this moment meant. Why were they here? Lionel stepped forward, a slight nod in his direction signaling the others to move. They parted like the sea, making way for me to approach. "You did it," Lionel said, his voice steady, though there was a quiet reverence to it. "We all knew the truth, but you're the one who made it visible. You're the one who made them see." I felt the words sink into me like heavy stones. This wasn't just about corporate ethics anymore. This was about something deeper. This was about visibility, about forcing people to confront what they had ignored for so long. "You deserve to be seen," another voice spoke up. It was Nathan, standing a little further behind Lionel. "We all know what you did. We saw it from the sidelines. And it's not just about your brother or the company. It's about the people who've always been silenced." A quiet murmur of agreement rippled through the group. I looked at them. These people who had been part of the system, who had seen the cracks, who had felt the pressure of Adrian's ambition, and realized something I hadn't before. They hadn't just witnessed the lies, they had lived them. We were all waiting for someone to stand up, one of the women from the group added softly, "And you did it. You're not just a whistleblower, Evelyn, you're a survivor." A knot tightened in my throat, and I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I had spent my entire life playing the background, the unnoticed one, the one who had always been quiet. But now, here I was, surrounded by people who saw me, and for the first time in my life, it felt like enough. Lionel stepped forward again, his eyes meeting mine with a quiet smile. "You don't need to carry their weight anymore. This is your moment, Evelyn. Whatever happens next, you've earned it." I swallowed hard, emotions swirling in my chest. I had no idea what came next, but I didn't feel afraid. For once, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I wasn't running from Adrian's expectations, from my father's silence, from the Marlowe name. I was walking into something new, something of my own making. I looked back at the group, feeling an odd warmth spread through me. For the first time, I didn't feel like the outsider. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. Nathan gave me a small nod of encouragement, and that was all it took. I took a step forward, passing through the line of witnesses, their silent support giving me the strength I needed to keep moving. As I reached the end of the parking lot, I paused, looking back at them one last time. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "for seeing me, for finally seeing the truth." And with that, I walked toward my car, the cool night air feeling like freedom against my skin. I drove away from the gala, from the Marlows, from the past. The road ahead wasn't clear yet, but I was no longer running. I was moving forward, finally free from the weight of their expectations, finally free to build my own future. The applause from the gala was long gone, but I didn't need it. The truth had been spoken, and it was louder than any round of applause could ever be. I was seen, and that was enough. As I drove into the night, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me, knowing I wasn't just walking away from the Marlows, I was walking towards something new. And for the first time, I was the one in control of my story.